Hello, and welcome to the Center for Progressive Urban Politics. We have a fantastic guest here for you today. I'm with James Howard Kunstler, noted author and blogger. And James has written two blogs this week on current events. And I just had to sit down with him and talk to him first about Syria. And then we're going to just kind of dive into the plethora of things that seem to be captivating the United States media these days. James, welcome.
Pleasure to be with you, Kevin.
James, you sound like you got a little bit of a chest cold.
I do. Me and about 4,000 other people in the town that I live in.
Wow.
But I'm getting over it.
Well, hey, thanks for being on, Jim. That's always a rough thing to do. Appreciate you being here today. Well, Jim, earlier you wrote a blog on Syria and the goings on there and what our apparent rush to war is. And you had started out with the old saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Are you referring to how every time they seem to want to go to war in Syria, there's a chemical attack in an area where the Syrians are winning in a conventional campaign? Is that what you're kind of getting at, or is it something else?
Oh, I'm definitely getting at that, as well as the many other times that we've been kind of shanghaied into war. Before that, we had the business in Iraq.
Right, weapons of mass destruction.
Although I must say, I had a different attitude about it back then. And I might as well be frank about it. Back in 2002 and 2003, the UN sent a mission to look through Saddam Hussein's possible weapons stockpiles. And they were not permitted by Saddam Hussein to look in a lot of places. And my attitude back then was we probably had to go in and at least take a look. Mm-hmm. Now that didn't mean that we had to bomb Iraq back to the Stone Age, but it seemed plausible to me that we might take a look because the UN weapon inspectors simply didn't get to look in an awful lot of places. So I think that there's a lot of what has become contrarian received wisdom now that you can't make any claims that other governments are doing bad things. But in this particular case, and in the case all along of Syria for the past 5-8 years, it seems that we've been doing one thing after another to cook up a fake excuse to go to war, and it's very, very dangerous. And in this case, I don't think I've ever seen a more chaotic or bizarre train of events leading us in that direction.
And it really is bizarre. When you look at the lead up to war with Iraq, you could see the careful staging as they built public opinion and then took us off to war on, right. Whatever, even though it was, a false and ultimately proving to be a false endeavor. But in this case, it's so haphazard. And Trump's tweets seem to provide a whole new element to that.
The tweets are semi-incoherent and just downright silly. And there does not seem to be any real hard evidence for sure that this event even happened.
You in your blog today, which is appropriately titled "Warmongers' Remorse," you talk about Mattis coming out and not being able to display any evidence to the public on this.
Yeah, that's Jim Mattis, Jim Mad Dog Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, former general in the U.S. Marines. And he was asked at a House Armed Services Committee hearing on Thursday whether whether we knew for sure that this event had actually happened. And he basically said no. He didn't have any evidence. And they were, it was still pending. They were still waiting for it. They were standing by. And the idea that, we were going to marshal this giant military effort and bring all of these warships into the Mediterranean near Syria on the basis of something that seems to have no reality-based claims is really shocking. And of course, the American public is just kind of tuned out. They don't seem to really be paying attention. Maybe they're too distracted or too busy going broke, because that's a big theme in American life these days. And I have a feeling that would make the public pretty frantic. This constantly being shoved downward into a financial spiral auguring into the ground. So the public, has not really been heard from about this.
No, they're not. And in the last run-up to war with Iraq, I was one of those people who was out in the street protesting it. And for some reason, there just doesn't seem to be an anti-war movement. You have a few leftovers like Code Pink, they're still adamant and out there, but they seem to be preoccupied with Gaza. But no one is out there other than, of all people, Tucker Carlson from Fox News, speaking against this run-up to war with Syria.
Yeah. It's hard to account for that, except for maybe the fact that we have not really felt the consequences here at home, except for the soldiers, of course, who come back from these military theaters maimed and crippled. Maybe there aren't enough, maybe there haven't been enough of them to enrage the public. Maybe, I can't really account for it.
Yeah, interesting.
You'd think that the voters, which is another term for the public, the voters would be a little bit disturbed by all this.
You would think. Strategically looking at this, what are the risks? I can't, personally, I don't see the benefits to this other than we take out Assad for however bad he might be. But on our side, what would you say the strategic risks are aside from the tactical risks?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say what the benefits would be. Nobody has proposed who exactly would be the replacement for Assad, or even what group he would come from. I mean, that's just a total blank. Nobody's filled in that blank. The consequences of this could be very dangerous. The Russians have claimed that they have the ability to shoot down our missiles and destroy our Navy. And I think that there is reason to believe that they have weapons that, can penetrate our defensive systems. We don't know for sure, but is that something that we want to play with? Do we want to play with the lives of several hundred Navy men on board a ship? I don't know. We could always start World War III. That probably wouldn't work too well for anybody. So I have no idea what all this bluster is about. We seem to just be determined to start some kind of a dust-up with Russia. There are various parts of the permanent bureaucracy and the creatures of the swamp who surround it, in the various, lobbying and racketeering arms of the deep state. I
was going to ask you, do you believe in a deep state?
I do. I mean, I don't think that it's a shadowy organization full of guys who look like Alan Rickman, but I think there is a permanent bureaucracy that has entrenched interests. And, there's even a rule of organizations that I think applies. I forget I think it's called Purnell's rule after Jerry Purnell. And the basic idea is that 80% of an organization's efforts are spent simply in the effort to prop up and aggrandize the organization itself. And the other 20% is, you know, spent doing whatever duties they're supposed to be taking care of.
Right. I've heard it couched as the 80-20 rule. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's also the Pareto rule, but
Okay.
that applies to the same thing and to other things. But you know, it would appear that an awful lot of the organizational energy of the permanent bureaucracy is being spent simply, you know, keeping it going and making it appear to be indispensable to us.
Right. Now, in their pursuit of maintaining this deep state, this permanent bureaucracy, are we witnessing, when you look at the raid on Trump's former attorney and how the FBI is engaged in that and the Mueller investigation, are we witnessing a coup in slow motion?
Yeah, one could easily interpret it that way. And, you know, there's so many inexplicable elements of what's going on in this country right now. You know, one is, now I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on TV, but it's a little bit hard to understand where, for example, the American Bar Association is.
Well, I was going to say, where is the outrage on the issue of attorney-client privilege, which seems to be a cornerstone of our judicial system?
Yeah, it's a cornerstone of the rule of law in America. And that seems to be being eroded. But where are the authorities who give voice to the norms and standards of what composes the rule of law? And, you know, that would include the American Bar Association. How come they haven't been heard from? You know, where is the authority on this? And on what authority do we now just change that very important relationship between lawyers and their clients? I happen to not, you know, I did not vote for Trump. I'm not especially a Trump supporter. You know, I make fun of him on my blog. Mm-hmm. I've dubbed him the golden golem of greatness. And you know, he has furnished me with an awful lot of, you know, comic material.
Oh my gosh, every night it's a different tweet.
Yeah, but you know, some things just ain't funny. And that wasn't too funny. What the FBI and the Southern District of New York branch of the Department of Justice did. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop on that. You know, maybe some people in the Justice Department need to be disciplined about that. You know, maybe we need some kind of a really severe house cleaning in the Department of Justice. But if that's the case, you got to say Mr. Trump has been pretty deliberate about, you know, not rushing into that.
Any thoughts why? I don't
know what he could do. I don't know what I mean, apart from firing a lot of people, apart from replacing the attorney general, I don't know, you know, maybe like everybody else, he's waiting for the Inspector General's report to come out and begin the process of clearing the air about the conduct of the people in the FBI. And there has apparently been an awful lot of at least suspicious conduct in the FBI.
And you're referring to what was going on during the 2016 election?
Yeah, and even after. And I'm referring to the whole Peter Strzok and Lisa Page business with Andrew McCabe, and Andrew McCabe's own activities in fiddling with documents and leaking documents. And, you know, and I think there were a lot of other people at the FBI who were on that bus at the time.
Do you think this raid could have been fueled by McCabe's firing? It's like the deep state saying, you just don't take a guy's pension away. We'll teach you.
Well, and I'm not even really persuaded that they took his entire pension away. I think they took away some of it and part of his benefits, but I don't think he's going away from this empty-handed. Although I do believe that he may be subject to indictment. It's a little bit early to tell. Once again, that gets back to the Inspector General's report. He was, after all, fired on the basis of what his colleagues at the FBI learned from the Inspector General. And a committee, some kind of an ethics committee, either was formed or already existed at the FBI. Mm-hmm. And based on what the Inspector General had turned up, that they recommended that McCabe be fired. And he was not fired by Trump, as many people imagine. He was fired by Rod Rosenstein.
Now, whose head is on the chopping block as we speak, correct?
Yeah, and that would appear to be some kind of a legal / tactical move to disarm Robert Mueller, who needs somebody that high up in the Department of Justice to approve of his warrants and give him permission to go forward on various stages of the investigation. So if you get rid of Rosenstein, then there's nobody there. Mueller ends up being a kind of stranded asset.
Interesting. Speaking of Mueller, Comey launched his book tour this week, mm-hmm. and called it The Truth Untethered. But I guess that's a way for him to say, no, I don't belong to anyone. I'm unlike what we found in 2016 when he seemed to be protecting Hillary Clinton and then, brought her in and didn't bother to swear her in or really press her on where the 30,000 emails were. What do you think of this book tour? Is it a desperate gasp of him and who he might be still connected to in this bureaucracy?
Well, there's probably no question that he's campaigning to save his reputation, at least. And I think that may be mostly what it is, because he has been kind of injured reputationally. As Ricky Ricardo used to say to Lucy, he's got a lot of splaining to do. Like, why did he issue immunities to, most of the people in Hillary Clinton's office before she was even sworn, and she never was sworn in to testify, but before she was even interviewed. And, then all of the stuff that followed that with the kind of fake proceeding to an indictment that never happened. Mm-hmm. And then coming back again in October of 2016, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe a generous reading of that might just be to say, well, the guy was director of the FBI and he really screwed up. Mm-hmm. And he screwed up in ways that, they're on the record. You can't take them back. They're right out there for everybody to see. And now he's trying to save his reputation, and he's doing it in a manner that is likely to not only possibly save his reputation, but also make him very wealthy, or at least wealthier than he is now. But of course, seeing how the United States works these days, one could also imagine him sliding right into a job with Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan or some other place where he'd make $10 million a year. So, writing books is kind of a mug's game.
Right. And that seems to be that revolving door. It's just another example of a deep state where there's a corporatocracy that seems to take care of their own.
But he's a curious character. He is truly a charismatic personality. A lot of people have said that and sincerely. And I can see why they would. He's this kind of a physical freak. He's 6'8", and he towers over everybody. And that alone, would tend to give him a kind of a commanding presence. So he's an interesting figure. He's right out of some kind of a central casting for what really ought to be a heroic figure at a weird time in history, but ends up being a figure kind of dragged into the mud of ignominy.
Interesting.
And so, he's trying to pull himself out of the mud now.
So really, it just, while we've been talking, I can't help but think that the implications, ramifications of the results of the 2016 election are still haunting us in a very big way. And
we're still litigating it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much that Trump won, but Hillary lost. That just
the New York Times is still litigating it every single day. You know, they've completely lost their minds. They're not interested in anything else.
Well, they did this fluff piece on Steele a few weeks ago, which I was just amazed at. I mean, this is a guy who hadn't had access in years, and yet he's brought on to be this Russian expert, and a fellow who didn't really have the best reputation in the service when he was in. And that fluff piece would make you think he walked on water.
Yeah, he was a kind of an intelligence mud puppy. You know, he kind of squirmed around in the mud of international relationships and turned up little worms and little, you know, strange little dead things. That was his job.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What I'd like to do is, I mean, we could, there's so much fodder here for conversation. We could talk about Comey, the Steele Dossier, the Russian investigation, but another big thing happened on Capitol Hill this week, and that's where we got to see Mark Zuckerberg appear in front of Congress and Senate. And
he's got some splaining to do too.
And he was like trying to mansplain almost to these congressmen. And the thing that struck me about, I watched the congressional testimony, and the congressmen, they seem to, their questioning was very disjointed. It came out of all these different tangents, and only once did I hear questions about, well, are you acting as a political gatekeeper in terms of which conversations you'll allow online and which ones you won't? For instance, you know, the example we had earlier, I tried to boost your Monday's blog on the cfpup Facebook page, and it got turned down. So those are the things that I think all Americans want to know. How is our speech being regulated by a private entity, and how is our privacy being preserved or not being preserved? And we didn't really seem to get to that in the...
Yeah. Well, we don't seem to get to the bottom of anything these days. And you know, we're satisfied not getting to the bottom of things, and then we go on to the next extravaganza or spectacle or cavalcade of freaks or, you know, Kardashian event of some kind. You know, I'm amazed. I'm sorry to change the subject, but I'm amazed at this whole business about the Russian UK double agent, Mr. Skripal, Sergei Skripal, you know, and his daughter Yulia. The whole story has just faded from view. And meanwhile, the daughter, Yulia, has been released from the hospital in the UK and is now some sort of a hostage of British security.
Because it was a nerve agent attack, correct?
Yeah, right. Well, supposedly.
Yeah.
They supposedly, you know, the story has totally fallen apart. At least the official UK government story has fallen apart. They supposedly put this nerve agent on the doorknob of the Skripal's house. Well, you know, nobody else, the postman, the maid, the gardener, you know, whoever, the friend, nobody dropped dead on the stoop. The Skripals themselves left the house, went and had a nice leisurely lunch in downtown Salisbury, England, and then had a postprandial stroll to a park bench where they went unconscious. You know, what kind of a second-rate or third-rate jive nerve agent is that? You know, that allows you to, you know, walk around for an hour and a half before you drop. It's insane.
Yeah, we'd have to question the efficacy of it.
Yeah, I mean, they might as well have just put, I don't know, you know, Drano or something on the doorknob.
And even before the evidence is fully evaluated, we're the UK, the United States, we We dispelled a bunch of Russian diplomats.
Yeah, 60 Russian diplomats were thrown out of the USA for that. But my point is that the story has completely disappeared from the headlines and the editorial op-ed pages. Nobody is asking for any answers. Nobody's raising any questions about what the hell actually did happen and what's going on with the UK intelligence service. And why aren't these Skripals talking to the press? So,
very
I'd like to know.
Yeah, inquiring minds would like to know.
Yeah, I mean, since this was an event that prompted a pretty serious diplomatic dust-up between the USA and the UK and Russia. You know, I mean, we're not doing these things frivolously, are we? Expelling their diplomats? Because, by the way, how does that make for an improved international dialogue? You know, getting rid of the people that we're supposed to be talking to who are visiting our country. So the whole thing is nuts.
So
and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but, you know, it gets back to your question of, do you believe that this thing called the deep state exists? Well, I mean, you have to wonder why we're doing things that seem to be so patently insane. So, and this seems to be, you know, completely insane. I think it's amazing that the Skripals even survived this business. You know, whoever did this or pretended to do it was so incompetent that they couldn't even kill him. You know, in this day and age with, you know, the kinds of things that are available to do that, they failed. And so they're there and, like, you know, tick, tick, tick. One of these days, someone's going to want to talk to them.
And they're still alive to talk.
Yeah, well, they're still alive. So, you know, so what are we going to do now? Are we going to just kill them? You know, there are noises about putting them in a witness protection program type of thing in the USA. And, you know,
they'll be in Reno, Nevada.
Yeah, they'll send Skripal. They'll send Sergei Skripal to pretend that he's an optometrist in Boise, Idaho. You know, and his daughter will go there and join the Rotary Club. I don't know, man. What a wacky country.
It just, you know, I can't help but think of that whole concept of a fourth turning when,
yeah.
You know, you look back 80, 85 years ago, we were on the brink of total war, economic stagnation, and we seem to be back there again. Although the economic stagnation doesn't seem to have hit yet because they've been so successful at keeping this financial Ponzi scheme going with quantitative, first it was TARP and then quantitative easing and then ZERP. And
well, I would argue that they have been successful in squelching the economic damage that's occurred because I live in a flyover part of America in far, far upstate New York, 200 miles away from New York City. And I live in an old factory village that had 5 factories, and they're all gone. And the population here is visibly suffering terribly. You know, they just show every visible sign of being trashed and unhealthy.
Like seeing obesity rates.
Oh yeah, you know, obesity, tattoos, nose rings, idleness, bad behavior, drugs, opioids. You know, the whole kit bag of depression and purposelessness. You know, there are almost no jobs here. And, you know, you can see the country really suffering. And even physically on the landscape, you see it expressed in the failure to even maintain much of the property around here.
So you're not talking just the larger infrastructure you pointed to in your geography of nowhere, but you're talking about homes and
people can't even fix their roofs. You know, I mean, instead of fixing the roof, you know, they go out and they buy a $30 tarp, a blue tarp, put that over the roof. You know, that's the kind of thing you see in the third world, and now it's visible in America. I don't know how they keep their cars on the road. And I think increasingly that's going to be an enormous issue because, you know, probably the main manifestation of the economic injury that's occurred is that so few people can now qualify for a car loan. And that's how Americans are used to buying cars. And having a car in most of America in one way or another is mandatory nowadays if you want to function.
Right. It's almost like in the West, you had to have a horse as a means of transportation, livelihood, and everything.
Well, you needed that in the East too before the car came along. You know, so that was a universal thing. But you know, car ownership in America is mostly, you know, mandatory if you want to function.
We built up our whole infrastructure is around the automobile. There are very few people whose lives are structured so that they can do without an automobile.
Yeah, and many of the places where you can get away with that are very expensive to live in. You know, like Greenwich Village, and you know, the few surviving small towns that walkable small towns in America. So it's a terrible spectacle of loss, and it's quite visible once you get away from the blue voter areas of America, the places that people think are still thriving. There are very few of them. You know, it's like Manhattan, Brooklyn, Washington, D.C., Boston, Los Angeles. Did I say Washington? I guess I did. And parts of San Francisco and Silicon Valley.
It's interesting, Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, and that's about it, you know. And
in all of those places, the disparity of wealth is enormous.
Yeah, well, in many of these places, there's no wealth left. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, even you go out to the Midwest and parts of the Midwest, even the farmers who own farms of thousands and thousands of acres are, you know, they're simply getting by borrowing money. Because one of the dirty secrets of industrial agriculture is that, you know, the biggest input for doing that is borrowing money.
There are ways to get over it. I met with Joe Salatine probably a year ago. We talked for about an hour about that. And he said there are ways to make farming profitable without having to go through, you know, indebt yourself and become part of the industrial.
Sure. But, you know, so anyway, yeah, you see the damage everywhere. And what remains is really this Potemkin village of a stock market. And
the stock market seems to be doing well regardless. Like it's down.
Well, it's not doing well right now. I think we're seeing something a little bit strange going on there. You know, we're seeing an episode of really kind of scary choppiness. You know, up 400 points one day, down 400 points the next day. That ought to be kind of scary to people. And it seems to me one of those dynamics where, you know, you have a kind of an ever widening centrifugal kind of breakdown of things. And we're heading to that. It's not clear to me how the financial authorities are able to hold that together. My guess is that a lot of it just has to do with the algo bot trading.
Okay.
But even there, I think there's tremendous potential for instability that is built into the algo model of trading. And that has really been ramped up during a period where the stock market only went up. So the bots have been conditioned only by a rising stock market. And it would be my contention that a choppy stock market would make them kind of crazy. You know, machine crazy anyway, maybe not crazy in the way that humans understand it, but in the way that their own algorithms end up being thrown off so badly that they start to deteriorate in orbit, shall we say.
And they start making bad buys.
And they start spinning out of control. So that may be what we're seeing there. But the Potemkin village analogy interests me because some centuries ago, when Catherine the Great was ruled in Russia, she had a prime minister named Mr. Potemkin. Mm-hmm. And she asked to be taken on a tour of the realm, and they put her on a barge and floated her down the river. And in the meantime, Mr. Potemkin had gone ahead and had a lot of false fronts constructed of the villages along the way, so that they appeared to be
everything looked wonderful,
beautiful, freshly painted villages, when in fact they were, you know, really kind of low down, kind of sad, pathetic places. And that's where that comes from, the Potemkin village. And that's what the stock market sort of is. It's the false front of a decrepitating economy.
Well, absolutely. When you look at the level of stock buybacks out there, obviously the real economy, the Main Street economy, isn't working. Just the other day, I saw where the CEO of McDonald's got a big bonus, and their revenues have been flat, yet their stock price is highly elevated, and it's all stock buybacks. It's, again, like you're saying, this is a facade that's being painted for.
Well, that's the new norm that we've established, that it doesn't matter what your earnings are as a corporation. The only thing that matters is what the share price is. And if you're boosting your own share price by machinations, it doesn't matter. You know, the share price is up, your bonus is up. You know, sooner or later, there will be blood one way or another. Probably the shareholders will feel the blood, and then, you know, once they do, they'll probably come back after their executives and claw back some of those bonuses.
Because they'll say, you know, my God, how could you have given away that much of the company to the bankers?
Of course. You know, it will only be at that point that they make themselves look bad. And for the moment, they're able to make themselves not look so bad. And so they get away with it.
And so is it, when you look at what's going on in the private sector, in the public sector, is this something of a kleptocracy we're seeing right now in some respects? Is it, I mean, how would you describe what's going on with America, the people that are running America?
I would describe it very, very simply and precisely as racketeering. To become a nation of rackets. And some of these rackets are happening in places that are just disgraceful, like medicine and education. You know, education is an endeavor that is dedicated to the truth. And we've turned it into a college loan racket. And medicine is an activity that is dedicated to doing no harm. And we've turned that into a racket in which we're ruining people financially and ruining their lives and taking away their houses and driving them into bankruptcy because they go into the emergency room to get 4 stitches and they end up with a bill for $12,000, you know, for a 30-minute visit to the doctor with a suture.
And yet we don't seem to be able to have the conversation on this that actually leads to meaningful change. Precisely
my point. And if we were going to have a coherent conversation about what's going on in things like medicine and education, we would use the word racketeering, and we would understand what that means. You know, it means money grubbing by the most immoral means.
And in a way,
unethical means. And if we use that language, you know, if we use the vocabulary properly, we probably have a better conversation. But we don't even use the vocabulary.
Right, because, for instance, when you look at our electeds, we call them campaign contributions. We don't call them bribes, because a bribe would indicate what you're talking about. That would be they'd be part of the racket then.
Well, exactly.
So we can't fix that because, well, we're giving them a contribution. But if we were to talk about it in terms of a bribe, and it's part of the racket we're in.
Well, I have a lot of friends who are over 60 years old, who have a lot of strange encounters with the medical establishment, and they complain about it a lot. And I tell every single one of them, you know, when you have a conversation with people about this and you complain about it, you call it what it is. You call it racketeering, and you identify it correctly, and maybe we'll be able to begin to have a coherent conversation about it. But, you know, as I've said many times, the main thing that's going on in this country is that we don't have any kind of a coherent consensus about what is happening to us. And therefore, we're not able to construct any kind of a coherent plan for what to do about it or how to even talk about it.
And is that because there are no true muckrakers out there?
Oh, I don't know about that. It's very puzzling to me. I mean, even though what we call the mainstream media may be malfunctioning in so many ways, there are an awful lot of guys that are out there who are enterprising reporters, and they, I mean, there are the Matt Taibbis and the Glenn Greenwalds and the Caitlin Johnsons and many people out there who are reporting on the misbehavior, misdeeds, racketeering, criminality, just lack of coherence, unaccountability, all of these things. But the authorities don't seem to get the message. I don't see anybody in the Department of Justice prosecuting any major HMO or hospital for the pricing practices that they use, which are, they're like something out of the mafia. I mean, imagine, you go in to see an orthopedic surgeon and he says, well, you need a knee replacement. I haven't had one of those, by the way. I have had a couple of hip replacements. Anyway, he says you need a hip replacement, and you say to him, oh, that's interesting. What do you guys charge for that? And he said, oh, we don't know. I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
How can you not?
How could you not know? I mean, how could you not know? You have a professional organization you belong to, So, we're just, part of this pervasive and immersive racketeering that we're stuck in is also just pervasive dishonesty, and we don't call it out. And you need to do that personally in your own life. You can't just wait for an investigative reporter to do that. You go to the doctor and he tells you he wants you to take a 10-minute test that's going to cost you $11,000. You better put the screws to him and get it straight. He's got some splaining to do.
Some splaining to do.
He got this is America's Ricky Ricardo moment. America, you got some splaining to do. But we haven't asked for that, and we're not getting.
And we seem to be very happy to go along with whatever prescription we're given by the medical community. It's all about the drugs and the procedures that they're going to do to make us well. But the reality is we don't seem to focus a lot on the wellness aspect of staying.
No, obviously not. And the education module of that is just as bad, if not worse. Because not only is it a money-grubbing racket, but now they have sunk so deep into an abyss of hostility to the truth and hostility to reality, at every level, at every institutional level, that it's a wonder that anybody could come out of that system and know what reality was. When you have college deans all over America who are telling you that diversity and inclusion means shutting down debate, that's it. I mean, that's the bottom line of what they're saying.
And it's working. When I talk to millennials who've left these, I wouldn't call them higher institutions of learning. I call them indoctrination camps in some respects, because they'll say, well, yeah, there is some speech that should be restricted. So out the window is that view that, well, I may detest what you say, but I will fight with my life to defend your right to say it.
That's totally gone. And what is most remarkable of all is the cowardliness of the deans and the college presidents who abide that and don't do anything to counter it, fight it, oppose it. Just amazing. I mean, you'd think that these people would be in search of free and open debate and free thinking and the truth. So that itself should be a warning or a marker to the American public that something is very wrong in our country and in our culture when the universities are not interested in the truth.
Right. And certainly when you look at what students are paying for that degree, credential, it's mind-numbing to me the thought of someone would come out of college with anywhere from 20, 40, 60, 80, $120,000 in debt after 4 years is amazing to me.
Yeah, and the scams that are being run to go after these people who can't pay are just unbelievable. You know,
because none of it can be discharged, correct?
No, you're right. It's under the Bankruptcy Reform Act under George W. Bush. The college loans are non-dischargeable debts, meaning, you know, it doesn't matter if you go bankrupt, you're still stuck with it. And, you know, they run these scams like if you, they put you, if you run behind in your payments, they'll put you in a payment program that will continue to compound your debt. So if you originally owed them $30,000, but you can't pay it back for a period of years because you can't get a decent job coming, you know, when you're 25, 10 years later, you turn around in that $30,000 debt. Even though you're in a repayment program, that $30,000 debt has become a $60,000 debt. You know, you'll never get rid of it.
It's a loan shark paradise.
It is absolutely, a racket. And
then you're out of college. How do you save for a home? Because you're going to need as we were discussing earlier, you're going to need an automobile. So you're going to need to take out a loan to get a
Forget about it. You know, they're not going to buy houses and they're not going to buy cars. And they're not. A lot of them are not.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we'll see how that plays out in 2 years or 5 years or so, when these people really start to mature and their grievances really ferment for a while.
Do you think, you know, part of me, I think if I were that age, I would be leading the revolution and burning a couple bank buildings.
Yeah.
I don't see that kind of courageousness, that kind of, well, enough is enough. And I don't know why that is. Within the people most afflicted, I don't see organizing and going on.
Well, it might be facile to say that a lot of young people are just simply distracted by their telephones. They're distracted by their own discouragement. They're feeling that there's really nothing that they can do, that they have no agency in their own lives. And they're distracted by, you know, the few pleasures that they can seek, you know, whether it's, you know, sex on Tinder or opioids or getting a new tattoo or you know, screwing around on Facebook and sending tweets out and that stuff. I'm really amazed. I've been waiting for years for what I call the magic moment, which is the moment that some really, and you know, it wouldn't have to be even, it might be just an inflection point that has not really a discernible kind of power behind it, but I'm waiting for that magic moment when a tweet goes out to the millennial generation and it says, let's all stop paying our college loans back this week. And they do. And all of a sudden the banks are standing there with their pants down, you know, unable to process this rebellion that's occurred. So I actually tried to foment that a few years ago by recommending it on my blog, but apparently I failed. And but who knows?
Have to wait for things to get a little worse.
Pardon?
Just have to wait for things to get a little worse. Yeah, it could just be that, you know, conditions aren't bad enough. We're not ready for that marketplace riot or something like that. Things just aren't bad enough. So, Jim, we're getting a little low on time here. It's been flying. It always does when we're having a conversation. So I'm going to ask you a question about the near-term future. Where do you see things playing out? For instance, will Trump will a coup be successful? What role is Bolton going to play in all of this? What's going to happen with Mueller? Where do you see, if you had to do some prognostication over the next couple of weeks, where do you see things going?
Well, a lot of interesting kind of swirling events out there. And I would preface this by saying remember, we're in the time of American history where anything goes and nothing matters. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, that we don't pursue any of the stories that keep on turning up, and they never have any kind of a satisfactory conclusion or resolution. Mm-hmm. It seems to me it's possible that the whole Syria business will set up Mr. Trump as a potential candidate for the 25th Amendment.
Okay.
To be removed under the clause of the 25th Amendment. I forget which number clause it is, but it's the one that says if the president is not competent to carry out his tasks, then a small number of people in the government, including the cabinet and some key congressional people, can simply remove him.
None of them seem to be very loyal to him right now.
Right.
So.
No, he seems to have no loyalty. And let's remember, that would be a very sanitary way of getting rid of him. Much easier than impeachment. You don't need evidence. You don't need a trial. You don't need, you don't need procedure. You just need him to be trundled away under cover of night, with the explanation that he's too crazy to be president. And he's kind of set himself up for that. His most recent tweets about Syria have been like the tweets of an 8-year-old child.
Yeah,
so
just frightening.
To make that case. So there's that. At some point, you would think that somebody's going to have to answer for whatever it is that all the trouble we've ramped up over Syria. And we're either going to have to make a statement that we were wrong about the poisoning, or that we changed our mind, we're not going to do anything. Or maybe we'll just pretend that we did something and not do anything. Right now that seems to be what's going on. Mm-hmm. We drew a line in the sand, and then we just kind of walked back to the beach, and sat down under the umbrella and opened a cold one. So hard to say what's going to happen with that. I kind of, I think the big shoe to drop with the Department of Justice and the FBI and Trump is the Inspector General's report, which they've threatened to release for the last couple of weeks. And, I don't know what's holding it back, but, supposedly any day that's coming out. And, we already know that provided them with enough reason to ask Andrew McCabe to step down, or to fire him, actually. They didn't ask for his resignation. And I think that, we have reason to believe that a lot of questions will be answered there. So it's going to be a very exciting 2 weeks. The choppiness in the stock market is very disturbing, and I could see that ending in some kind of an equities bloodbath, before early May. Mm-hmm. But, it's also possible that they can keep that suspended a while longer. I don't think they're going to keep it suspended forever.
Right. They've certainly made a liar out of me since 2008 on numerous occasions.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Okay. Well, Jim, I want to thank you so much for being here with me and my audience today. I know everyone's going to really appreciate your comments. And I wish you all the best and a quick recovery from your chest cold.
Well, thank you very much. And I wish you the best. It's always nice to see you.